Alright, today we get back on track painting the hero characters for Nemesis Retaliation. I'm going to use a fast Rattle-Can OSL effect on this Scout miniature. I like using Rattle-Can OSL on miniatures for two primary reasons. First, it gets half of the miniature painted up quickly, speeding up the overall painting process. Also, it's an easy way to designate player color on the miniature. I prefer designating player color on a miniature with OSL rather than using a snap-on base ring or painting the rim of the base with a certain color. So with that said, let's get to painting up the Scout for Nemesis Retaliation, and welcome to Treehane Miniatures. I always start with the same initial approach when painting miniatures in this style. I like to start with a color that is slightly darker than the color that I want for the OSL. And you'll also notice that I'm using the exact same miniature for demonstration purposes for this section of the video, which is a blue OSL on the captain from the first video. I've basically decided not to subject my camera lens to any more mist coming from the overspray from these Rattle-Can spray cans. For this purple OSL, I'm choosing Rust-Oleum Aubergine. I spray this color directly over the black primer on one side of the miniature. I spray the back of the miniature from an angle that is a little above the miniature and slightly to one side. I try to do this on the least interesting side of the miniature. So for example, on this particular miniature, I chose to spray the aubergine from the rear and slightly to the model's left. I feel that the right side of the miniature has more interesting features, such as those little satellite dishes over his right shoulder. I want these features to be fully illuminated by the natural light rather than the OSL, so I place the OSL on the left side of the miniature. Next, I use matte white to highlight within the aubergine spray paint area. I begin with some basic edge highlighting, and as the amount of paint decreases on my brush, I switch to more of a traditional dry brush application. I'm not too careful about how I highlight features within the aubergine spray paint area. I just want to make sure not to hit any of the surrounding black primer. I used to call this style of painting half chop because I'm basically slap chopping half of the miniature with a single color. These highlights can be colored with the appropriate speed paint, or I could use regular acrylic paints as a glaze so that it looks like bright reflected light. Alright, so I mistakenly begin the OSL glaze with Toxic Boils, but I felt this looked way too pink for my liking. Liquitex Muted Violet ink is a much better choice for this effect. This Muted Violet ink is a transparent ink, so it works perfectly as a glaze without any additional thinning. Muted Violet ink is easily my most used acrylic ink color. Usually, I like to use it as a recess shade to deepen the shadow areas of a miniature rather than using a wash. German Camo Black Brown is a safe way to base coat the Scout's fatigues no matter what color I want them to be. Within reason. I mean, it doesn't make sense to use it as a base layer for like pink. But as long as I'm going with something like khaki, olive green, or desert camo, this will work great. And since we got the player color already covered with the purple OSL, we can paint the rest of the guy's clothing with more natural looking colors for the Marine. For the Scout, I'm actually going for something a little different. I use khaki for most of the clothing in the Nemesis series, so today I decided to go with rust orange, like some sort of flight suit from the 70s. I think that this subtle orange color will work well with the bright blue of the face shield as well as the purple OSL. Besides, this Scout character has active camouflage in his arsenal, so it doesn't really matter what color his clothing is. This base layer of German Camo Black Brown will keep this burnt orange color from looking too bright. I'm applying a single highlight color, which is a mix of burnt orange, pro acryl, and ice yellow. The German Camo Black Brown base layer, along with this desaturated highlight color, almost conceals the orange mid-tone layer, leaving the suit looking more like a light brown orangish hue. I'm pleased that it looks different from the usual khaki clothing that I paint almost without thinking. This is one of those color schemes that I didn't plan ahead of time and just kind of went with what I was feeling at the moment. I'm using fur brown for the various straps and pouches that are present on the Scout's pants. As I'm editing this video, the fur brown looks awfully close to the burnt orange of the pants, but it looked like there was much more contrast while painting this next to the burnt orange. I can also add a little ice yellow to the fur brown to add some conservative edge highlights, as well as a little distressed look to the leather components. I'm very careful not to take this too far because I don't want the look of the leather to compete with the highlights found on the orange pants. I'm painting two types of non-metallic metal on the Scout's metal components. I'm using a fairly stock grayscale non-metallic metal for all of the armor features, such as shoulder pads, boots, and helmet. This begins with a base coat of Necromancer cloak. Basically, I'm painting all of the metal items except for the rifle with this color. As a last-second pivot, I also decide to repaint the straps on the pants and the little grenade-looking thing sticking out of the leather pouch. Contrast is key when miniature painting, and those fur brown straps just weren't doing it for me. I'm continuing to highlight all of the metal objects with uniform gray, to include the grenade sticking out of the leather pouch. This is mostly just a whole bunch of edge highlighting. I occasionally have to scratch in some reflections on larger smooth surfaces such as the guard on the forearm. Also notice that although I'm using this as the first highlight color for the Necromancer cloak, I'm not applying it to the straps on the legs. I'm leaving those as is for maximum contrast and separation within the well highlighted orange pants. That initial fur brown layer was definitely a misstep, and I'm glad that I've corrected it here. I try to remain flexible when painting. I realize that the only way I can truly ruin a miniature is to completely give up on it. I continue to brighten the metal with some ash gray. The edge highlights become more selective at this point. It wouldn't make sense to simply cover all of the edge highlighting that we placed with the uniform gray. Otherwise, I would just eliminate that step. I'm also not doing any color blending or glazing as I go through this progression of gray colors. When speed painting like this, I'm trying to achieve the impression of metallic objects. I'm not necessarily trying to perfect the metallic look. I can save that for larger pieces more deserving of the time investment. The final piece to this non-metallic metal puzzle is to dot in some tiny glints of light. For this, I'm using Matthew White. I still have no idea why the army painter refuses to spell matte with an E at the end. I don't know, maybe it's a cultural thing like how English-speaking countries spell gray differently, or spell the word color differently for that matter. Next, we turn our attention to the rifle to create some blue-black gunmetal. This follows basically the same approach as the other metal bits, minus the final white highlight. I want the gun to remain a little darker than the rest of the metallic items. This obviously goes much faster because we're dealing with a significantly smaller area. This is my usual gunmetal recipe, beginning with a base coat of blue-black pro-acryl. Then we use some Iron Wolf to edge highlight all of the ridges over the entire gun. There really aren't any smooth surfaces to get carried away with, so this goes pretty fast. I'm also using this color progression to take care of the extra magazines along the Scout's waistline. I turn to Wolf Gray as the final highlight color for the piece. The only rule here is to apply small edge highlights without covering all of the Iron Wolf that came before. These occur mostly along the buttstock and top of the rifle barrel. For the decoy discs on the Scout's back, I'm thinning titanium white ink with flow improver. I'm thinning this down quite a bit because I want it to settle in the recesses and just tint the surface of the raised areas. This will cause the subsequent pink color to appear brighter in the recesses, making it seem like these discs are emanating light. To make the disc pop with pink, I simply hit the disc with fluorescent pink pro-acryl. Nothing much to this at all. I want the focal point of the miniature to be the Scout's face shield. I'm using this image of a blue face shield as a reference for how I want to paint the right side of the shield. I'll have a similar dark line of separation bordered by two lighter blue areas. The left side of the face shield will be mostly dark blue. I base coat the shield with deep blue. This dark blue color will make up the dark line that separates the two bright blue reflections. It also makes it easier to layer the lighter blue color over the black primer. Next, I use Vallejo electric blue to establish the base for the reflections on the right side of the face shield. Having a reference photo is very nice for giving me some direction on how to go about this. Finally, we're going to add some bright blue reflections using a mix of electric blue and titanium white. While the previous two steps only took about 30 seconds each, this step is going to take quite a bit longer. I will glaze this on in a few layers, and I will gradually lighten the mix with more titanium white. This isn't a big deal since the area that we're dealing with is so small, but more time is spent on this layer than any other single layer on the entire piece. I feel that this is okay. This is where I want the viewer's eyes focused, so a little extra effort is worth it. I begin with some standard glazing, drawing this light blue hue beginning near the dark area and finishing where I want the reflection to appear brightest. I eventually switched to stipple glazing. This is basically just dotting in paint that's thinned to a glazed consistency. It's most effectively used for transitions between colors. It's a technique that I've only used a couple of times, but I really enjoy it. I will make the edges of the glass the brightest area with a little edge highlighting. I occasionally return to the previous two layered colors to glaze over the outer edge of these light blue reflections. This is helpful to reestablish the deep blue of the face shield if the titanium white becomes overbearing. Well, that wraps up painting the Scout for Nemesis Retaliation. I'd like to thank my amazing channel members for supporting the work that I put into these videos. You too can become a channel member by using the link in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to join our growing community of people who love to paint every miniature twice. You'll also want to subscribe because the slapshot version of this guy is coming out in a few days and you won't want to miss it.